Hello to everyone. Okay, this is unusual for me because I'm usually seeing people's faces. I'm not accustomed to looking at my own face. And while I'm communicating about a topic that is dear to me, I'm going to, sorry I have something in my mouth, but my throat got a tickle in it, and we'll bear with that. No, but I will be sending out a copy of the talk. I will talk for about an hour. You can write in any of your questions, and we'll give time, at least a half hour or so, for you to be able to ask questions, and hopefully I can answer them in as much detail as possible. We're talking about communication and language, words to the nerves. Basically, more accurately, it should be called language and communication, because language precedes communication. And this presentation, this talk today, is for parents, about you. And it's not about looking right now about the language of children, though that is important. We're looking at what is going on for yourself as a parent, because language and words are verbal, and we know that they're nonverbal. And we know that words are a flow between people, and that flow can be presented in a verbal or nonverbal manner. Basically, that flow between people coming through the words are basically emotions. And an emotion is basically a flow of energy, and that energy is in motion. It's not a matter of it being stagnant. It is a constant. And that emotion that happens in each of us is something that is held in the words. It is in the vibration of the words, and they come through our whole body mind. And it's not a matter of us being in a situation, whether it's with our children, our mates, our people that we're working with. It's a constant. It's an ongoing situation. And part of the issue tonight is explaining that our bodies are our unconscious mind, and that emotion that is presented through the words we use, that comes through as language, is a total and complete communication. And it is a communication that it has to be understood that our emotions are primary and our language is secondary, because the emotions are going to occur whether somebody is talking or whether somebody isn't talking. And in that process, you know, we have to look at that we have emotions, we have language, and we have a body-mind experience that occurs, and this affects our communication. So part of what tonight is about is understanding that words that compromise our language or compose our language is understanding our own awareness as individuals in the world that we live in today. Because today is extremely chaotic, much more chaotic, much more confusing, because we are constantly using devices that keep us constantly connected. And those words are constantly stimulating the language within us, which is stimulating our emotions. Basically, an emotion, as I've said to all of you, an emotion is an energy in motion. It's not that it's stagnant. To understand our language, we have to understand that emotions are constantly occurring, and they occur before the language, because they are coming through our body. When we talk about emotions, and we're talking about energy in motion, it's in our thoughts, it's in our ability to verbalize or non-verbalize, and it's in our body. So that even sometimes when people aren't talking, we are experiencing information that are part of our emotional self on an ongoing basis. Emotions are part of our neurophysiology, as Candace Pert, who wrote the book Molecules of Emotions back in the 1970s and 1990s, she concluded that there is this limbic system in us, And in that system, there are peptides, and the peptides connect. And an emotion can be something that we become addicted to, that we become unaware that we're addicted to. So whether we have a certain type of perception, whether we use certain types of language all the time, unconsciously, or sometimes until we bring it to awareness consciously, we end up becoming addicted to a certain state, to a certain perception, because our nerves from the top of our head to the soles of our feet are experiencing that emotion that is evoked by the words that we choose, our thoughts, our attitudes. So basically, as individuals, we only have two emotions. We only have fear and we only have love. And that is on a continuum. And what happens to us is that when we're in a state of fear, we're going to be constricted. Being aware of ourselves when we're constricted allows us to gain the ability then, when we're in that fear state, to begin to change it and move towards what we call a love state. Because in the state of love, we are then in an expansive state. When we're in an expansive state, we are in a much better position to be able to use our total cognition, our total ability to be creative thinkers, to be creative problem solvers. When we go into a fear state, we become constricted and we go into that treadmill of a negativity that is, generally speaking, we're not always aware that we're doing it, but it's a downward spiral. For instance, when we say, well, this is impossible, or this is how I have always been, we are in a pattern of saying, this is how I've always been, this is how I'll always be, which isn't necessarily so. So that when you open up and you move out of that state of fear into a state of love, into a state into your heart space, you're in a much better position to be able to come up with a creative idea, even if it's a silly idea, even if it seems like, oh, well, this is completely out of the ordinary. What it does is it removes you from being stuck. It removes you from being in a pattern that perpetuates something that is not productive, not necessarily healthy, not necessarily helpful in the situation. The process of language itself is uniquely human. We're the only species that can language about language. And what allows us to do that is, yes, our prefrontal cortex. And that's the reason why it is so important that we stay in a state of love, because then our prefrontal cortex can work with the creative parts of our brain to come up with new ways of looking at things and new ways of processing things. We've known that the aspect of language affects our whole brain and affects our whole body. And we know that the right side of the brain communicates with the left side of the brain. But it's not just the brain that's communicating. It is the whole body that lights up, because through us there is an electrical current. And that current is affected by our thoughts, by the words that we use, because our words do go to our nerves. And they affect us in ways sometimes that we aren't necessarily aware of. We have to watch our tone of voice, how we move our body. How do we present ourselves? What are we doing in those moments that we are maybe in a state of constriction, or when we're in a state of love? And allows us, those little taking a moment, stepping back and thinking, allows us to be able to increase our awareness, which then allows us at those moments when we need to change our tone, to change the words we're using, to be more expansive and more constructive. When Candace Pert discovered the whole issue of this mind-body connection, it was a revolution. And she discovered that those opiate receptors in the brain, as I said before, really were throughout our whole body. And that she was able to really understand and communicate with us, and is something that allows us to be aware, if we have that knowledge, that because our emotions are primary, we have to begin to understand that we have an unconscious. And I'm going to show this, hope you can see it. This down here, the iceberg, we can see this, we can feel this, this is conscious. Our unconscious is our body in us. So it is our unconscious mind that also speaks. So when we feel that constriction, the constriction might be in our lungs. The constriction might be that we're getting, you know, a part of us that is tightening up. Our jaw gets tight. Our eyes begin to constrict. We may be furious. Our kid might have done something that we hadn't expected. We're dealing with a boss that is asking us to do something that is irritating. Being aware of what part of our body is constricted allows you to have greater access on how to change it. Now, this doesn't happen all at once. It happens in increments, but it's just allowing yourself to be aware is the opening of access to this, what we call subconscious mind. So we think we forget emotions. We think incidences that happened to us when we were young, but we don't. And we are all human. So it doesn't matter until the day we just die, we're going to be experiencing emotions and feelings in our body, and we have to be aware of that. And the reason why we have to be aware of it, because it's in those moments when our awareness is actually happening, we have access to the ability to change. So that we have access to being able to be aware of when we're in a love or fear state. We have access of when we're in that heightened anxiety state. And we know we're maybe not sequencing our words as well. Maybe we're unable to sequence our thoughts. Maybe we are regressing to name calling, or swearing sometimes can be a release of anxiety. I mean, I'm going to say that, you know, there's a reality, but it's how we're managing all those states in our somatic self, which is our body. When our somatic, it's our body. We can do things, and I will talk about those things we can do to release some of this tension. You know, there are times what I call these ghosts that come up, and when I least expect it, getting caught in a situation, and it feels like, oh my gosh, you know, I have this strong reaction, and it's connected to, you know, something that happened ages ago, and it reminds me of that game Pac-Man. And I know it's ages ago, but in Pac-Man, they have these little ghosts that pop up, you know, and you have to get them, all right? Otherwise, they're going to get you, and then the game is over. So emotions that are in our past are like little ghosts that we are in a position to begin to be more consciously aware of, in noticing the factors that are going on within us in our somatic, because that is a form of communication for us to be aware of, and to trust that that communication is important and is real. I mean, that you have these patterns then that happen at times in families in terms of looking at language and the communication patterns. Parents are generally not educated to be aware of themselves as human beings first. You know, there aren't those manuals we talk about to raise kids, but there isn't really a manual. I mean, yes, you get all kinds of self-help, but what happens is that those self-help books frequently go out the window when you're in a situation and you're in excuse me, a family, and you're dealing with maybe a mate or somebody that has another opinion about, you know, what's taking place with a kid or even an animal, it doesn't matter. And you're not educated into being aware of yourself. You're not necessarily educated in ways that allow you to say, in this moment, I have tools, I have things that can be used, and I can be kind to myself in the process. Our past experiences are imprinted on us. We are wired. We are fortunate that we have the ability to make change. The change doesn't necessarily happen overnight. And we don't necessarily know how to always be kind and considerate to ourselves first in the process of this change, because our language we usually use to ourselves is generally speaking more negative than it is positive. And the research is out. Positive language does make a difference, but it's not the only thing that makes the difference. So what happens in the family, in the systems, when the parent doesn't have awareness of themselves, that they don't really know this is a real trigger. This has always been a trigger. And I don't have to have this always be a trigger. I can figure out a way so that I am not so triggered. My blood pressure doesn't need to go up. My voice doesn't need to get so strident. I can make a difference for myself, to myself, before I'm doing it for my mate or my child or my colleagues or whomever. And then when you're in a position of greater clarity, you're able to be in a situation that you're reading, and I call it reading, the other person's intention, understanding how they themselves are limited in their language and in their own state of either fear, on that continuum of fear to love. You're able to better understand it and not necessarily take things so personally or be so incredibly reactive or judgmental. The whole aspect of judgment that really influences so much of our perception is really a fear response. When we're in a state of discernment, discernment is a love response. And discernment really is that state whereby we may not like what we're coming up with, what we're really looking at, but we have that part of us that knows how to be integritous, how to be honest, how to be caring and compassionate, and say what is important in that situation that is completely heartfelt and really a state of vulnerability. And we allow ourselves at that moment to be truly authentic and caring. And in that state, you're not meeting your partner or whomever you're talking to around in a state of fear. You're meeting them in a state of much more compassionate love and understanding, because you've been more compassionate and understanding to yourself. We can't give what we are not able to feel in ourselves to another individual. Now, a big factor here for all parents and people who work with children is children, because you're here, you're all parents, okay? And the irony is a child reads the parent's energy, probably faster sometimes than the parent reads the child's energy. And they may not be able to put words to it, but oh my gosh, they know it. They can't put a word to it, but they know it, all right? And we underestimate that. We underestimate it because, again, I'm gonna go back, we're all energy. That's what an emotion is, and it's primary. Every mother on some level knows that their child read their moods, their behaviors, their tone of voice in utero. Now science is proving that, you know, I mean, but mothers knew that a long time ago, long before science really understood it. So the point is that the more that the parent as an individual, more that you as an individual, me as an individual, can be aware of our emotions, our energy and motion, the more that we're aware to understand how confusing it really is. We also know, and this is something that's come up quite a bit, that when we're talking about energy, we know that many children are adopted. And in that realm, we also know that many children who are adopted are not always coming from the most favorable environments. We know that, and this presentation cannot get into the factors of what it is like to have children that are born, tox positive, children that are born with various types of issues. Maybe they're not tox positive, but maybe they were in utero abused and so forth. Tonight, I can't get into that. But what I can say in terms of when you're talking about energy with children that are adopted, those ends up being sometimes in a category that even more so requires that the parent be in awareness of their own self and their own triggers. Be aware of when, especially if it's an adopted child, be aware when you are in a fear state with that child. Be aware when you are in a state of total confusion, when you're in a state, when you're wondering, what have I done? Because this child right now appears to be completely uncontrollable, because that child reads that, and they will many a times, especially if they have attachment issues, especially if they are, especially if they're born tox positive, they or been in utero abused, they're going to read it and they're going to go to fear, because that has been their primary resource. And they didn't, many of them, have in utero abilities to know self-soothing or any of those mechanisms that allow for an ability to regulate a very dysregulated system. So the more that the parent is dysregulated, the more that the parents are unable to come to a respected decision or respecting themselves, the more that family system stays in that chaos. Because I share this we use this with the kids, but it's really important because this is what's going on inside of us. When we're like this, we're a circuit. And when you get with another person and they put their hand here and you're connected, you've got a circuit of energy going there. That is just how we're wired. So our language allows us to be able to begin to have better control, better awareness, a calmness, a state where we don't go into fear, where we don't go into conflict, where we understand that compassion that is needed. Now, compassion doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. You still have boundaries. You still have a form of discipline. You still have a form of structure, but that a structure is like much more of like an amoeba. And the reason why it's like an amoeba is because it still has a boundary. And it allows for some flexibility within the situation. And this goes for parents, because parents don't have the same type of parenting style or discipline style. One parent thinks the kids, you're too soft on him. You need to be firmer on her. You can't do this. You have to be careful, because one of the things that comes up for all of us in the state of fear is that all of us have experienced embarrassment and shame. Every human being has experienced that. And when we go to those states, it becomes very debilitating. It becomes like prison's going down that deep rabbit hole and spiraling down, and how do I get out of it? And the issue is that because we've all experienced those emotions, we have to be aware and really candid with ourselves and courageous with ourselves to say, I'm being triggered. Because if that's the emotion we're feeling, unintentionally, we end up putting that emotion in our energetic field, and it affects our children, or affects the people we're around. So that's the reason why right now this is so important as awareness for the adults. It's that tone of voice, it's that frustration, it's that look, it's the roll of the eyes, it's that sigh that we see our kids do to us and we get upset with, that we have done, that we may still do and we're not aware of. The time when, you know, maybe the kid, you know, is not a great athlete, and yet he or she wants to play a sport. And if there was athleticism in the family and this kid didn't get it, you know, it can be a challenge because you have expectations that are just crop up. It's like, oh my gosh. And you begin to cringe for the child because you're feeling their feelings, or you think you're feeling their feelings. There actually is a projection. And the issue is how to hold your space and be aware of yourself and hold that space and keep that love and that compassion, that understanding, not just for that child of yours, but for yourself. Because that's where it starts for all of us. We are looking at, though, and the reason why this is so important, I guess I'm focusing on it, is because we're right now in a world that is perpetuated right now with a lot of fear. And keeping that judgment, having that awareness is really, really important, because there is so much judgment in any direction right now. And to keep that discernment in ourselves, and it's not 100%, it's just understanding that it's like a barometer, okay? And we got 100%, and maybe we only go to 50 or 60%. But that's better than 0%. And it's better on your neurophysiology to be able to maintain a state that isn't so hard on your nervous system, your muscles, your body, because it wears it down. Being aware of a state of love and a state of compassion and a state of appreciation for what you do, no matter what it is. Maybe the state of appreciation is that, and care and love for yourself is taking, 5 minutes or 10 minutes to sit and just be quiet and give yourself some space before you do something for the family or something for someone else. It is very, very, very important. It's understanding that maybe right now you may have to make a compromise that you don't really want to make, but you knew that it was going to be the best right now for the situation. It is crucial right now that the issue of self-care and understanding is important for parents, and that the language of I is used. It's not, you made me so mad, I became so mad. I am choosing to be angry about this situation right now, because that's where your perception comes in. I right now can't see any humor in what you're talking about. I can state it. I don't have to explode on it. I can say, yeah, my voice is getting loud. I'm feeling really frustrated, maybe confused. Or, maybe the kid lied for the 150th time. And you're absolutely concerned because you're not sure this kid's going to ever tell the truth. And instead of screaming and yelling, it might appear that it's absolutely ludicrous. And so you might end up laughing and saying, look, I'm not laughing at you. I am laughing because this is a pattern you use all the time. All the time. This is what you do. This is where you go to. This is especially true. I mean, I'm saying especially true, because a lot of these patterns happen a lot in adoptions, okay? And it's really a challenge, okay? One of the things that also is absolutely disarming at times for a child. It's disarming for us. When someone calls their behavior, you just call it. The kid throws a tantrum and you're riled up. You got dinner to get, or you got to work, or you've got to go somewhere, and the kid's throwing a tantrum. And it's like, okay, what do I do? And it's calling this behavior, but it's not calling the behavior with that tone of voice that says, I'm disgusted. I am thoroughly disgusted and I'm thoroughly frustrated. And, you got a lot of nerve. It's like, okay, look, how long are you going to do this tantrum for? How long are you going to run this house and scream and yell? How long are you going to stay in this bed and act this way? All right. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. How long? What's it doing for you? So that you change your response from one that is in a fear state, because that's where anger is. That's where frustration is. That's where, blaming is. That's where judgment is. And I'm not saying to be a Pollyanna. I'm saying move to that side of yourself that can be compassionate to yourself while you're looking at, okay, I'm really frustrated. You got to be kidding me. Because calling that behavior isn't what usually happens. We want to blame. We want to shame. We don't mean to do it, but most likely it was done to us. And we do what was done to us. We don't do what we know we are thinking about doing unless we are aware. I mean, I say the story. I come from an Italian family. I was raised in a yelling family. And it took me a long time to realize, okay, this is not working at all. It's not working for me. It's not working for him. It's not working for her. Okay, let me figure out. And lo and behold, it was like I had walked into a different world. It was a really different world for me, not to yell. And it took me a long time. I mean, it took a while. And yet, it made huge changes. But I had to take ownership. I had to admit, I'm the one that's yelling. And just because you're doing what you're doing, I don't need to yell. I can figure out another way of managing it. And I don't need to get sarcastic. I don't need to have a dig. I can call that straight. Excuse me. So we ask, we wonder frequently, how do we do this? How do we begin to interrupt? How do we begin to take and develop this awareness? And those ways of developing the awareness is to begin to give yourself permission to be aware. Give yourself verbally, give yourself behaviorally, give yourself the acceptance to be aware, to look at those aspects that may be really uncomfortable. Look at the excuses that are said. We all make our own excuses. Look at the blaming that we do. If it wasn't for that kid, if it wasn't for that, look at that. But give yourself permission to do that. Because in giving yourself permission, you open the door. You open the door from a neurophysiological way to your whole body. Because the words lead to your emotions. Those words affect your neurology, not just your brain. That's the misnomer, because as I'm talking, my whole body is feeling and experiencing every single word I'm saying. So it's not just in my head, because that's where we think, but we think sometimes, well, it's just here, and this is where it's at. No, it's in our whole body. So give yourself permission. That's the first thing. I give myself permission. And understand that in giving yourself permission, you've already started the cog of awareness. And that cog of awareness goes into your somatic. That cog of awareness goes into that deep structure of yours that says, I don't remember anything. And it really does. Allowing yourself to make small language changes. They don't need to be big changes. Make little changes. We always say we're going to take the big step. No, it's the baby steps that get us where we need to go. So the small change, frequently we say, it's kind of like, this is happening to me. How did this happen to me? And maybe it's, this is happening for me to learn what? So you take the to out of the sentence and you put the for in it, and it changes the whole meaning. Because if you put a to in it, this is happening to me, you allow yourself to be a victim. You allow yourself to be a victim, and we don't even think about it. It's just the way it is. But when I say this is happening for me, what am I getting out of it? What am I learning from this? And maybe the learning doesn't come right away. Maybe it's not something that you get an answer. You ask yourself the question, you will get an answer, because your deep structure is always working when you're asleep, and the answers will come. The reason will be there. So changing the little words. Take the word but out of the sentence. Put an and in there. Because you put a but in there, but disqualifies or negates what was said before. It's an and. So that little thing makes a big difference. When we all have different types of issues that come up. The issues for all of us, many of them are real. I mean, it's not that they're fake or they're fantasy. It's when the issue becomes the excuse for functioning. I mean, I work with all my kids, I call them my kids, that I have the privilege of working with, of being around. They all have issues. And they come in and they say, well, I can't do this because I've got this. I can't do this because I got this. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, no, that's not the excuse. Your learning issue isn't the excuse for you not being able to do something. You just got to figure out a different way. Your ADHD is not an excuse for doing something. You tell me you don't have executive functioning skills. There's all kinds of tools to deal with executive functioning skills. Do they like me? No. The kid that looks at me and says, well, I'm autistic. And I go, you know what? I was born female. And what's the big, the reality is we know that certain aspects appear real and are factors, but we can create alternative ways. We have to just let go a little bit of what we're using as being an excuse for what we can't do. And let's look at how we can create alternative ways for being able to accomplish something. I mean, because I've seen it time and time again. It's being able to notice the willingness to get out of our 3x5 box and create that amoeba that allows us to say there's a creative way to solve this problem. You know, when you get into the language of you should, you shouldn't, you could, you couldn't, you know, those are judgmental statements. And those judgmental statements cause the system to wear down or to shut down. And when that happens, our ability to think, our ability to be creative shuts down also. So if we let go of, at least catch ourselves and correct ourselves with the language we're using, those words to the nerves change, and they change us. So sometimes it's like saying in a family, okay, we're having a family meeting. Now they're liable to look at you because that is like, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? We can barely even sit down and have dinner together. I'm not talking about something that's an hour, you know, maybe a half hour, maybe even it's 15 minutes. But what you're doing is you're creating a different structure. You're creating a different energetic aspect in your environment. It's just a baby step. When you're feeling your system being overwhelmed, when you're feeling yourself being in that state of like, okay, what is happening? There is thymus tapping. I know everybody talks about tapping, but there's a reason why, because it's a somatic process. And there is this thing called the vagus nerve, and it goes, yes, to all of our organs and up and through our heart and to our brain. Yes, the tapping is basically bone conductivity, and it reverberates throughout our whole body. And when that happens, your breathing pattern is going to change. It has to. It's just a neurophysiological response. And there are times when yes, walking up and down the hallway of the office, or something has happened. You know, somebody's cut me off when I'm driving, and I get out of the car and I'm tapping because I got to get into the grocery store because I only have 20 minutes and I can't be bothered with sitting in the car and trying to calm myself down. I'm tapping. Do I look kind of weird? Maybe so, but you know what? At least I don't go in a state of fear. And there's been an ability to just collect myself and get done what I need to get done. That aspect of your self-talk, I'm going to go back to that. Be aware of it. Be aware of the times that you are hard on yourself. Be aware of those times when your inner voice is sarcastic, or your inner voice is the voice of that person way from the past who may be deceased, still speaking to you, that causes you to not feel very good, causes you not to feel very old. And release that voice. Just release it and bring it into your heart space and give yourself compassion. There are ways of taking care of yourself first, and taking that I and bringing that awareness, so that those words that you are saying to your nerves change. Allow yourself to give yourself gratitude statements at night. It's not hogwash, it's real. And allow those gratitudes to be reverberating in your body, in your structure, before you go to sleep. Even if you had one of those days that you wonder, how did this happen? You know, it was a crazy day. There wasn't much that went right. Still, give yourself gratitude. Even if you feel like the only thing you did that was constructive was, you know, do the dishes or get the clothing done, it doesn't matter. Because that's not the issue of what the action was. The issue is appreciating yourself and bringing that into your heart space. That's what we're talking about. And don't expect that appreciation to come from somebody else. We so frequently look at and we say, well, you don't appreciate me. You don't say this, you don't say that. Sometimes that is necessary. I'm not saying it's not. But give it to yourself first. That is really, really important. Because then when you give it to yourself, maybe you'll be able to hear it when somebody does give it to you. You're able to piece that together and process it and feel it. Not with a shield in front of you where it bounces off, but actually feel it. And bask in that appreciation. Because each day, you're doing far, far more good than you're not. That I believe is the truth. So if there are no quick fixes, I wish there was. I wish, you know, I had a magic wand and for myself and for everyone else, but there's not. But wherever you start, whenever you start, it doesn't mean that, you know, it's perfect. It doesn't work that way. It's a movement, it's a wave. But what happens is you don't dip down so far. You don't go down to that space that says, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I don't feel like I want to go on. What happens is it becomes less and less impactful. The rough edges begin to be smoothed over. And the teeter-totter doesn't dip so much. There is a way of keeping it more even. I mean, we're going to have those up and downs. We look at our world, read the newspaper. There are all kinds of things happening. They're not easy. And yet, what makes it different, what makes it easier, is what you are doing for yourself, first and foremost. That is really, really important right now. And when you begin, as you begin, awareness is liable to feel funny. It's not always going to be comfortable. Be kind to yourself. Be really kind and really honest. Because it's through the kindness and through the honesty and through that vulnerability with yourself, with your family members, your coworkers, that you allow yourself to have that courage to do what may not be comfortable, but may be necessary. Because it's with that awareness, in that state of your heart, with that compassion, that you can say those tough things to someone else And I'm not saying that person is going to like it, but what they will know is that you weren't in a state of fear when you were doing it. And that is significant, because if you meet fear with fear, you're going to have a big explosion. That's what happens. But if you meet that area that you know, you're gonna provoke that person in a state of love, that higher vibration, that higher energy. You're kind to your own nervous system as well as to the other person. And you decrease that level of negativity. And it's not always easy. It can be, at times exhausting. That's when you go in and you take care of yourself by being kind to yourself, doing what is healthy and important for you. Okay, okay, bear with me. Kristen asked, how long does an emotion last? And that's a very interesting concept. Basically, really, an emotion doesn't last that long. An emotion only lasts anywhere from 90 seconds to maybe 2 minutes. It's not that the actual emotion in our system lasts long. What we do as human beings is we create this story. And then we believe that the story is real. So we create a story. Even when you're in a trauma, traumas obviously take longer to get out of the system, and there's a number of things you do because there's different kinds of trauma. But the bottom line is the actual emotion doesn't last long in the system. When we create that story, though, we unintentionally or unconsciously, we go to sort for a similar story. And then what happens is that story we say is true. We believe it is truth. And it's not necessarily the truth. We learn other people's, and we watch other people, and we begin to bring in their patterns. So frequently stories are presented, and some of our wonderful stories, but some of them aren't so wonderful stories, and they keep us stuck in this emotional system, this emotional belief, this emotional attitude. That's the reason why, when I was saying, rather than looking at life doing this to me, or this person doing this to me, they're doing it for me. What can I learn? How can I learn? And how can I manage the situation in a way that maybe is creative and in a way that is not usually I've never done before. That's really important. I think the same goes when, as a parent with children, even those children that have various types of learning issues, or maybe have language impairments. There are ways of understanding how to help them become a part of the solution, rather than just going on and doing things in the same way, to come up with a creative way of changing and so forth. There are questions. Okay. They want to know, okay, I'll go to this and over. All right. When is anger a legitimate emotion, and how do we turn it into a positive emotion? This is an interesting question, because anger is always a legitimate emotion. Now that's going to sound maybe funny, but anger in and of itself is not a bad emotion. We have a society that doesn't know what to do with anger, is really what the problem is. But anger in and of itself is a legitimate emotion. It's what we do with that emotion that causes anger to be either healthy anger or unhealthy anger. But there is such a thing as healthy anger. And it's what do you do? What do you do with it? How are you healthy with anger? Might be a question. You're healthy with anger when you respond with to that anger or aware of it, that you don't inflict, whether in your deeds, your words, or your thoughts, negativity on a person. That you take that anger and you basically, and that's a whole nother thing of digesting it and turning it into, instead of into a judgment, into a discernment, and understanding what in that situation is the best possible solution and presentation to that anger, or not presentation, but a response. It is a presentation. How do I present my anger in a healthy way? Okay. How do you present it in an authentic, healing way? But anger in and of itself is not a bad emotion. It's legitimate. It's there. It's part of it. It's what we do with it, and it's how we demonstrate it. And you know, that's what I think. Can you recommend language for a parent to acknowledge, apologize to a child for an escalation, temper tantrum, blow up? The thing with tantrums and blow-ups, and our kids do it a lot because they are and want immediate gratification. And many of our kids do not know how to self-soothe unless they've got a computer or a TV or something in front of them. There are times when it is important to let the child know that the tantrum, they're swearing, or if they're breaking things, I mean, because they do, they're punching holes in the walls. There are things that they do. I mean, you know, and sometimes they're big kids. It's not, we're not talking about a tantrum with just a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. We're talking about a tantrum with a teenager, you know, who could be, you know, 5 feet, 6 feet, I mean, male or female. And it's important to begin to find out, what are they getting out of the tantrum? You have to find out also if the child has language. Does the child have words? Because many of our kids, many of adults, don't have words to communicate anger. They don't have words to communicate shame and frustration and fear. We don't give people those words frequently. So they don't have a language because it's so embarrassing. You know, it's embarrassing to say, I felt really ashamed that this happened, or, you know, I want what I want. I want to stay up another 20 minutes and watch TV, you know, or, you know, I want to go to this concert and you're not letting me go to this concert. So, you know, I'm going to rip everything apart in my bedroom, you know. Yeah, you have to communicate about that. You have to have those consequences. And you have to have an understanding of when, how to figure out a way to provide or allow for that activity that they don't, that they want to do, that is maybe scary for you to let them go to. It's terrifying to let a kid go to a concert nowadays. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, you know. So maybe you have to go to the concert with them, and you say, look, this is the deal. Either I go with you and we'll get some friends to go, or not. Or the kid that, you know, just doesn't want to do chores around the house and doesn't want to be a family member and there's a temper tantrum because they don't get to do what they want to do. Yes, there are times when you need somebody, a third party, to intervene, but it's also calling that behavior. And you can't be afraid. Here's the key. This is really, because kids can throw some really scary tantrums. And parents get afraid. Or The parent throws a tantrum. The parent is throwing a tantrum. They don't even realize it's a tantrum. You know, it's like they're screaming or yelling, they're having a fit, and they think it's perfectly normal. And the kid is terrified. And then when the kid goes to model the parent's behaviors, because mark my words, they're going to model your behaviors. Unless you do something to change it, they'll model your behaviors. But if those children know that you're afraid of them when they're throwing a tantrum, you can't be afraid of their tantrum. You have to be respectful of it, very respectful. Because there is a point where, you know, if it's keeps on spiraling out of control, you know, then things can become dangerous. So hopefully there's been an intervention along the way that it doesn't spiral out of control. But, you know, then therapy has to be done. There has to be something that intervenes, and there has to be methods that allow for those changes. All right, that is really, really important. But you discuss it, you have to call the behavior, because sometimes kids don't even remember. And I know, I mean, I can lay claims to this one. I didn't say that. Oh, yes, you did. Oh, that wasn't cool. That was bad. That was not a good thing for me to say. Yeah. I go, well, how long are you going to hold it against me? Okay. How long are you going to hold it against me? Okay. I slipped. I'm human. What are you going to do? So it is a level of vulnerability, and it's on both sides. It's on both sides. So hopefully, maybe some ideas. How can you encourage a parent to choose to use words that are more respectful when speaking to your child? What are the long-term effects of using demeaning words when speaking to your child? How can you encourage parents speaking words that are more respectful when speaking to your child? You know, part of encouragement for me is making sure I'm clearly understanding. What about the parent that makes it really frightening for them to use encouraging words with their child? Because using encouraging words can be very, very vulnerable. It can be a state of a person who didn't get much encouragement, having to give something or share something that they didn't get as a kid. And that's challenging. That's challenging for everyone. And so it's like saying, okay, what for you is vulnerability about being encouraging? What for you is you know, strengthening about using the words that you use now compared to using a word that allows your child to open up? Because when you start changing the words, as I said before, those nerves are going to feel it. And you're liable to feel really vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, it can be really scary. And you have to judge, you know, what it's like to let your kid know, all right, you know, sometimes this isn't really easy for me. Always being patient is not particularly easy for me. Your dawdling sometimes drives me nuts because I really believe you do it on purpose just to get me upset. So how can we figure this out? Because getting upset isn't working. And you know, you like this house, you like certain things. Therefore, you know, I need your help. That can be scary for a parent to say. All right, that can be scary to say, you know, sometimes I didn't get these words. I got other words, you know. And you may need to communicate that with the child. Because what happens when demeaning words are used over a long period of time, it seeps into a person's neurology. It seeps into your perceptual field of how you see the world and how you believe things to be. And it's not the truth. If people are told you can't, you're stupid, you're really dumb, that was a real asinine thing to do. You know, you're just a screw up all the time. Look, you know, you can't get B's. What's going on? Look it. I had you tested. That's what you're supposed to be able to do. No, look, you know, you're not the best player on the team. I mean, you try really hard, but you're just not the best player on the team. So suck it up. You know, you're lucky your coach plays you 10 minutes a day or a game or whatever. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you know, your brother is one way and you're another way, and you just didn't get what he got. Or vice versa. Your sister's one way, you're another way, you just didn't get what you want. Nope, you can't do it. You know, hey, you think you want to go into, you want to become, you want to learn math? Wait a minute. You better pick another field, because that field doesn't come real easy to you. It could go on and on. It could be about your looks. It could be about anything. What happens is you end up believing those words, and it really diminishes a person's self-esteem, their self-belief system. And it's like they're feeling like they're constantly climbing up a mountain, because the words do go to the nerves. And they do cause those biochemical states in us. And then we do these tapes. We have this tape that goes on. We create this story that goes on. And we begin to believe it. And it's all based upon words that were said to us from someone who probably was really hurting themselves and didn't know how to get out of their own hurt. So it's, you know, the thoughts that we have, their energy. Thoughts are energy. You know, they talk about, you know, you talk about athletes all the time and using, you know, mind over matter and using visualizations and, you know, doing all these tests on them, research projects, and saying they could visualize, and they really were able to get into their, you know, muscles, their body, they're able to communicate, they got in their breath patterns, blah, blah, blah. And they found that, oh my gosh, their skill sets increased. Well, if you think about the thousands of times you say certain things to yourself that you're not even conscious about, or you even look at a kid and you go, that was really a stupid thing to do. And we say, well, I only said it once, I only said it twice. The issue is sometimes it's like the perfect storm. It's just that impact, that piece that are factors. I mean, we know for a fact that kids get on the media and they are always checking out how many people are following them, how many people are doing this, how many people are doing that. And they get hooked into what is being said, how it's being said. And if they get enough criticism, we know that certain very unhealthy things happen. We know that suicides are up. It's because the issue of the insecurity, the issue of the fear, and their level of vulnerability. So when you ask what are the long-term effects, They affect our body. They affect our health. They affect our thoughts. You know, Kaiser Permanente years ago did a project, a research project, and it is still going, and I don't remember the acronym. But anyway, what happened is they took these conditions, they gave a list of conditions, and if a person experienced these list of conditions, then they associated it and correlated it with what would happen, you know, to their body mind, meaning, you know, their illnesses, the psychological issues, you know, their ability, you know, alcoholism, drug addiction, and so forth. And what they found out is that there was a high correlation to situations where people were exposed to very unhealthy, adverse conditions. And one of them is verbal abuse. I mean, that's real. Again, it's the words to the nerves. And so that's the reason why it's so important to start with yourself, ourself, because that's the only place we really can start. Hopefully I answered that clearly and thoroughly. I think, wait, here's, it's the issue. There was a question about anger, and it says that I'm guessing that anger is right up front of the emotions that most of us have difficulty in turning into something positive. And the answer is yes, because when we look at what is predominantly been what we've been exposed to, most of us didn't come from homes that were focused or concerned about such issues as fear and love. You know, we have all those factors that have happened in society and in the world, and we see far more fear, we see far more anger. And I mean, there's a great attempt now in educational systems in lots of places to turn it around, because it is having its own devastating, you know, results. And we know this. It's really been a very, very serious factor. But you take it one step at a time. See, that's it. A little bit does go a long way. It reverberates. It really reverberates. The other thing that when you're talking, I want to talk about anger with kids. And this is a tough one, which yes, I have experienced. It is important. It is really important at times to let your kid hate you. It is so important. And I say this because I've lived this. This is real. I have lived this. But it is so important at times that your kid is allowed to hate you, to not like you, to think you're the worst, most awful person in this world. Because sometimes you as the parent, and this is the reason why yourself, that part of you that loves yourself, has to be in there, strong in you, because they've got to trust you. They've got to trust you so that they're able to communicate that, so they don't go out and do something that's really unhealthy. But yourself, that I, has to be in a place we're seeing their anger, you don't go back and right now and say to them, I hate you right now also. You know, I don't like you saying this. How dare you? It's not going to work then. But we don't teach parents how to do that because people go, oh my gosh, that's terrible. No, it's a transient state that you teach them by them being able to communicate. Then you go in and you say, okay, let's look at this. What don't you like? You change that word hate into you really don't like this, and it really makes you angry, or it makes you frustrated, or it makes you afraid, or you feel like you're different because you're not getting to do it and your friends are. You take and you tear apart, not tear apart, but you open up that word that is meant to push you away, and you lean into it. You go into that fear because that's where their pain is. That's what happens. And they need that strength from you. Because you are their safety net. But you've got to have that safety net inside of you. That's where that comes from. There's a question here, as a parent, how strict is too strict? These are all really, really good questions. You know, too strict is a tough question, is a really tough question. And really, because each situation, whether I like it or not, we have to take it and judge what it means. But I think sometimes too strict is saying that when you carry over discipline from one situation to another, too strict is when our own emotions are spilling over into what the situation is. Too strict is when we end up shaming the child for something that they did. Too strict is when we realize that we're really overreacting. Too strict is when we know and realize I could have never done what you've just done and gotten away with it. But then again, I'm 30 or 40 years older than you, and that is in the past. It was a different day and age. The situation was completely different. I don't believe in corporal punishment. I don't believe in hitting kids. I think there are other ways around. I do believe that we have to be able to have boundaries, participants in supporting what's going on with the family. I do believe that we have to start young. We have to start young because we've got kids. We're in an indulged society, and you know, it's like we start kids out sometimes with too much too young, and we're not building for them the internal awareness, the internal locus of control. So when they act out and they're building up, you know, sometimes it's like, okay, all of it goes. Okay, I mean, you lose it. You're not going. I don't care. You're gonna cry. I don't care. You're gonna have a fit. I'm the worst parent on the face of the earth. But right now, this is what we're going to do. So if you're trying to it's got to have a match. There's got to be a balance when you're disciplining a child. And you don't You don't throw the kitchen sink at them. You know, if you're in an argument, you don't bring in everything they've done, you know, all the other times when they were doing the same thing and it was similar. Because it's not going to work, because it's too much. Then they're just going to, then it all falls apart. It's tough because when you're looking at discipline, you got to look at context. What is the situation? You know, I mean, if you have a curfew and the curfew is, let's say, 10 or 11, and the kid comes moseying in at 11:15, you've had to have a precedent set up, an agreement as to what are the consequences for that time that they are late. You can't at the last minute say, okay, you're grounded for the rest of the week or the whole weekend, because there's no context for them. So there has to be communication about what are consequences for behaviors, because otherwise you're setting the child up as much as you're setting yourself up. You know, things are different now, but there are times when, let's say a kid misbehaved and something happened, and they're not allowed to go out with their friends for that evening. And the consequence might be, okay, the family is going to watch this show. The consequence is you're watching the show with us. You're not allowed to stay in your room and just pout or complain or whatever. You're watching the show with us. And so you pick a movie that is not really heavy. You know, it might seem, you know, it might be an anime, who cares? But that might be a consequence. And that kid might pout through the whole movie, but that kid is still there. So it's like, when you talk about discipline, it's really important to be creative at times. That's right. Kristen goes, you're reinforcing the love. That's it. It's like, I'm thinking to myself, and I can remember when there were times that my daughter did not want to be around me. All right. And I remember that there was one time that the form of discipline was, you have to go on a walk on the beach with me, and you have to walk with me. You're not allowed to run. You're not allowed to do it. You have to walk with me. It was a good thing we were at the beach, because those negative ions really helped. Okay. But she wasn't a happy camper, I can tell you that much. But that was the discipline. And I'm not saying it always worked, but eventually, you know, we can laugh about it now. But at the time it was, you know, and then she tells me years later, okay, that was really creative. That was good. I hated you, but it was good. So I don't know if there's any, I can't tell. I don't know.
We're winding down to 7:30. So.
I don't know. How does this go? I don't know if there's any more questions. Anyway, listen, I want to say it's 7:27. I can't say any of you, but I want to thank all of you. And I want to just take a moment before we stop. Okay, I'm going to do something. All right, you all are there. So I'm going to bring the bell here, and I hope you can hear this. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I want you just put your papers back, pencils, just sit up straight and allow yourself to relax into your body. and appreciate yourself for taking this time. You're all busy. It's late, exhausted. It's been a long day. So just listen to the sound and close your eyes and let your eyes get soft in the sockets. And give yourself permission to expand into your own heart space and into all that love that is within you. You're taking a deep breath and allowing yourself to give yourself gratitude and appreciation. I thank all of you for allowing me to have this experience and to share, and for your trust. Many blessings. Good night.